The love that faded, the beginning of forever. They met when they were just teenagers, caught in the innocence of youth, oblivious to the storms that life would one day hurl their way. Aiden and Emily, two names that once spoken together felt inseparable, bound by the kind of love that seemed untouchable by time or fate. Their love story began in the crowded hallways of Ridgewood High School, a place filled with the aroma of fresh textbooks, the sound of laughter, and the whispers of young hearts forming unbreakable connections. Emily was the studious one, always with a book in hand, her world filled with classic novels and the poetry of long-forgotten writers. Aiden, on the other hand, was the free spirit, the boy with the charming smile and a penchant for adventure. Where Emily was careful, Aiden was reckless. Where she was soft-spoken, he was the center of attention. And yet, their differences only made their connection deeper. Their love blossomed in the small moments. The late-night phone calls where they whispered about their dreams, the stolen glances across classrooms, and the way Aiden would wait outside Emily's house every morning just to walk with her to school. To everyone around them, they were the perfect couple, the kind of love story that felt destined for forever. As years passed, their bond grew stronger. Graduation came, followed by college. Though they attended different universities, distance never seemed to be a challenge for them. Aiden would drive miles just to surprise Emily with flowers, and she, in turn, would write him letters filled with words that made even the dullest of days seem magical. They promised each other that no matter what, they would always choose each other. Then came the day Aiden proposed. It was on a quiet evening, under the stars, in the place where they had shared their first kiss. He knelt before her, a nervous smile on his face, holding out a simple ring that carried the weight of every promise they had ever made. Emily said yes before he could even finish his speech, tears streaming down her face. That night, they danced under the moonlight, believing their love was invincible. The wedding was beautiful, a dream painted in shades of gold and ivory. Friends and family gathered, witnessing two souls unite, vowing to stand by each other through every storm life would bring. As they stood before the altar, exchanging rings, Emily looked into Aiden's eyes and saw nothing but love. In that moment, she believed they would conquer everything, that love alone was enough to weather any trial. But life, as it often does, had other plans. The first few years of marriage were blissful. They traveled, explored the world together, built a home filled with laughter and warmth. They talked about starting a family, about growing old side by side. Emily still kept her books, and Aiden still brought adventure into their lives. Everything felt perfect until the cracks began to show. It started subtly. Aiden would come home later than usual, his phone buzzing more often, his laughter no longer reaching his eyes the way it once did. Emily noticed, but she convinced herself it was nothing. He was just busy with work. Stress did strange things to people, didn't it? Then there were the missed dinners, the forgotten anniversaries, the way his touch no longer lingered like it used to. Emily tried to hold on to the pieces, tried to remind herself that love, true love, was unbreakable. But even unbreakable things can shatter when neglected for too long. One night, as she lay in bed waiting for him, the realization hit her like a storm. Aiden was drifting away, slipping through her fingers like sand, and she had no idea how to hold on. And then, she found the message. A simple text, a name she didn't recognize, words filled with intimacy, with familiarity, with the kind of warmth that once belonged to her alone. Aiden was in love with someone else. cracks in forever. The message replayed in Emily's mind over and over again. Aiden had changed, but she had refused to see it. She had convinced herself that his absence was temporary, that work stress had consumed him. But now, as she sat on their bed, staring at the words glowing on his phone screen, she knew the truth. He had found someone else. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled up, heart pounding against her ribcage. The messages were filled with tenderness, familiarity, and intimacy that no longer belonged to her. Late-night conversations, inside jokes, whispered promises, the kind of words Aiden used to say to her, now spoken to a stranger. Emily felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The walls of their once happy home seemed to close in around her. She had always feared losing Aiden, but she never thought it would happen like this, not while she was still standing right beside him. When Aiden walked into the room, she looked up at him, her vision blurred with unshed tears. He paused, sensing something was wrong. His eyes darted toward his phone, which she still held in her hand. For a brief moment, a flicker of panic crossed his face, but it disappeared just as quickly, replaced by a forced calmness. "Emily," he started, stepping toward her. "I can explain." "Don't." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. She swallowed, willing herself to stay composed. "Just tell me the truth." Aiden hesitated. That pause, that moment of hesitation, was all she needed to know the depth of his betrayal. The truth was already staring her in the face. The slow collapse. The days that followed felt like a slow, agonizing descent into heartbreak. Emily wanted answers, explanations, anything to make sense of the chaos unraveling in her life. But Aiden, the man who had once held her heart so tenderly, could only offer vague apologies and empty reassurances. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said one evening, his voice tired. "I never meant to hurt you." But intentions meant nothing when actions had already carved deep wounds. Love wasn't supposed to be accidental, and betrayal wasn't something that just happened. Emily tried to understand. She listened to him, hoping to find some semblance of truth in his words. Was she not enough? Had she changed? Was there something she had done to drive him away? But every time she tried to justify his actions, a part of her screamed at her to stop. This wasn't her fault. She wasn't the one who had broken their vows. She wasn't the one who had sought comfort in someone else's arms while promising forever to another. The last attempt. One evening, in a last-ditch effort to save what was left of their marriage, Emily suggested counseling. "Maybe we can fix this," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Maybe we can find our way back to each other." Aiden exhaled heavily, rubbing the back of his neck. "Emily, I don't know if..." "Please," she cut in, desperation evident in her tone. "If there's even a part of you that still loves me, let's try. Just once." For a moment he seemed to consider it. A flicker of the Aiden she once knew appeared in his eyes, and then just as quickly, it vanished. "I don't think I can do this anymore," he admitted. His words landed like a physical blow. The finality in them left no room for hope. Emily stared at him, tears burning her eyes. "So that's it," she whispered. "You're just giving up?" Aiden looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "I'm sorry. Sorry." That was all he had to say. It wasn't enough. The breaking point. Emily didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory, every promise, every whispered, "I love you," that had once meant the world to her. And now, all of it was reduced to an apology. Morning came, and with it, the realization that she could no longer stay in a marriage where she was no longer wanted. If Aiden had already moved on, then perhaps she needed to do the same. The next evening, she packed her bags. Aiden watched silently as she folded her clothes, placed them into the suitcase they had once used for their honeymoon. The irony was cruel. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice hollow. Emily paused, looking up at him one last time. "You were sure first," she replied. And with that, she walked out the door. The weight of absence. The door clicked shut behind her, a sound so final that it felt like an echo of every dream that had just died. Emily walked down the familiar pathway outside their house. No, not their house anymore. It was Aiden's now, a space where their love had once flourished, but had now withered into a distant memory. She clutched her suitcase tightly as the cool night air brushed against her face. She had thought leaving would be the hardest part, but in truth, it was the silence that followed. The absence of his voice, the void of his presence, the knowledge that this chapter was closing with no possibility of a rewrite. Her phone buzzed. A message from her best friend Rachel. "Are you okay? Do you need me to come get you?" Emily hesitated before typing back. "I don't know." Because she didn't. She didn't know how she felt, how she was supposed to feel. Angry, heartbroken, relieved. Maybe all of it at once, a tangled mess of emotions that she couldn't unravel. She hailed a cab, giving the driver the address of the small apartment she had rented last minute. It wasn't home. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was where she had to be now. The city lights blurred past her as she leaned against the window, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Sleep wouldn't come easy tonight. The days without him. The first morning without Aiden was the hardest. Waking up in an unfamiliar bed, in a room that held none of their shared memories, she felt like a ghost in her own life. She reached for the empty space beside her out of habit, only to be met with cold sheets. She spent the day in autopilot, unpacking, cleaning, trying to create some semblance of normalcy. But how did one adjust to a new reality when the old one had been so deeply ingrained? Rachel visited in the evening, armed with ice cream and wine. "You don't have to talk," she said, plopping onto the couch. "We can just sit and eat and pretend the world isn't falling apart." Emily smiled weakly. Sounds like a plan. But pretending only lasted so long. At night, the loneliness crept in. She would roll over, expecting to hear Aiden's steady breathing beside her. She'd reach for the phone, almost dialing his number before stopping herself. He wasn't hers to call anymore. A week passed, then 2, and slowly the pain dulled. Not gone, just numbed, like an old wound still healing. The what-ifs. Grief came in waves. Some days, Emily felt almost normal, busying herself with work and friends. Other days, she drowned in the what-ifs. What if she had fought harder? What if she had noticed the signs earlier? Could she have changed things? She had replayed their last conversation countless times in her head, trying to decipher if there had been anything left to salvage. But Aiden had made his choice long before she walked out that door. One evening, she received a text from him. "Aiden, I hope you're doing okay." She stared at the screen for a long time. Did he mean it? Or was it guilt? Did he miss her? Or was he just trying to soothe his own conscience? She typed back, then deleted it. Some words weren't worth saying anymore. A new beginning? Months passed. The pain, while still present, had become bearable. Emily had started finding joy in small things again. Morning coffee, the warmth of the sun, the pages of a good book. She had learned to laugh again, even if sometimes it still felt foreign. And then, one day, she saw Aiden. It was in a bookstore, of all places. He stood in the aisle, flipping through a book, looking just as he always had, except different. There was something about the way he carried himself, a weight in his expression she hadn't noticed before. Their eyes met. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. "Emily," he said, almost hesitant. She took a deep breath. "Aiden." And just like that, the past and present collided. Echoes of the past. The moment stretched between them like an unfinished sentence, each of them waiting for the other to speak. Emily hadn't planned for this, hadn't thought about what she would say if she ever ran into Aiden again. But there he was, standing just a few feet away, a ghost from a life she had left behind. "How have you been?" Aiden asked, his voice careful, as if testing the weight of his own words. Emily hesitated. How had she been? She had been healing. She had been breaking and rebuilding. She had been learning how to exist without the part of her that had once been intertwined with him. But saying all of that felt too raw, too real. "I've been okay," she finally said. Aiden nodded, shuffling awkwardly. "You look good." She almost laughed at the absurdity of it. How did one respond to that, coming from the man who had once promised forever? She settled for a polite smile. "Thanks. You too." They stood in the bookstore, surrounded by walls of unread stories, yet their own felt unfinished. Emily should have walked away. She should have let the past remain where it was. But a part of her was still curious. Did he regret it? Did he miss her? "I've thought about you a lot," Aiden admitted, as if reading her thoughts. Emily stiffened. "Aiden, don't—" "I just need to say this," he interrupted. "I made mistakes. I know that. And I don't expect you to forgive me, but I do want you to know that. I regret how things ended. I regret hurting you." She took a slow breath, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She had spent months dissecting their relationship, trying to understand where it had gone wrong. And now, here he was, offering a confession she wasn't sure she wanted anymore. "Regret doesn't change anything," she said softly. Aiden looked down, nodding. "I know." A silence passed between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, Emily took a step back. "I should go." Aiden opened his mouth as if to say something more, but then closed it. Instead, he gave a small nod. "Take care, Emily." She walked away, and for the first time, she felt like she was truly moving forward, rebuilding herself. Days turned into weeks. Emily focused on her work, on her friendships, on rediscovering herself outside of Aiden's shadow. The encounter with him had stirred something inside her, a final closure she hadn't realized she needed. One evening, as she sat on her apartment balcony with a cup of tea, Rachel called. "Guess what? I set you up on a date." Emily almost choked on her drink. "What?" Rachel laughed. "Come on. It's been months. You need to get out there again." Emily sighed, staring at the city lights. "I don't know, Rach. I don't think I'm ready." "Just one dinner," Rachel coaxed. "No pressure. Just a new conversation with someone who isn't carrying your past." After a long pause, Emily smiled. Maybe it was time. Okay? One dinner? A new beginning. The restaurant was warm, filled with the soft hum of conversation. Emily sat at a small table, her fingers tapping against her glass. Her date, Daniel, was charming in a quiet way, someone who didn't demand space, but simply existed in it. "So, tell me about yourself," he said, smiling. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt excitement, not fear. She wasn't defined by her past anymore. She wasn't just someone who had been left behind. She was someone with a story yet to be written. And for the first time, she was looking forward to it. A reckoning of the heart. Emily never thought she'd feel this way again. The quiet thrill of possibility, the gentle excitement of something new unfolding. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, her life began to reshape itself into something she hadn't expected. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Daniel was kind, patient, and understanding. He never pried into her past, never asked her about the ghosts that lingered in her heart. He simply existed beside her, making space for her to breathe. And she found herself drawn to him, not with the same fiery intensity she had once felt with Aiden, but with something steadier, something safer. But the past has a way of clawing back when you least expect it. One evening, as Emily walked home from work, a familiar voice called her name. She turned, and there he was, Aiden, standing beneath the flickering glow of a street lamp, his face shadowed with something unreadable. "Emily," he said, stepping closer. "I need to talk to you." She hesitated, every instinct telling her to walk away. But curiosity, that same dangerous force that had kept her tethered to him for so long, made her pause. "What is there left to say, Aiden?" He exhaled sharply. "I made a mistake. I thought I could move on. But I can't. I miss you." The words hit her like a blow. Once, she would have given anything to hear them. Once, they would have mended every broken piece inside her. But now, they felt like an echo from another lifetime. "You don't get to say that," she whispered. "Not after everything." Aiden ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched into his features. "I know I hurt you. I hate myself for it. But I've changed. I swear, Emily. If you could just..." "No." Her voice was firm, steady. "I spent so long waiting for you to love me the way I deserved. And now, when I've finally found peace, you want to pull me back?" His eyes darkened with desperation. "Do you love him?" Emily faltered. The truth was, she didn't know yet. But what she did know was that she was happier without the weight of Aiden's betrayal crushing her chest every day. "I don't owe you an answer," she said finally. "You lost the right to ask." Aiden stared at her for a long moment before nodding slowly. I just needed to try." A bitter smile touched her lips. "And I needed to move on." She turned and walked away, her heart lighter than it had been in years. A future unwritten, Emily stood at the threshold of something new, something untethered from the pain of the past. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she was okay with not knowing. Love had once been her prison. Now, it was her choice, and she was choosing herself.